Ding goes the bell. It's time to die. I'm John Phillips, and this is After Hours. An architect of Obamacare says he wants to die at age 75. You should too. Let's go ahead and take a look at Ezekiel Emanuel in his own words.
What does the article say?
So I talk about what happens about growing old. And the article is a very personal article to think about what's the meaning and purpose of your life. And I picked 75 when you think about the combination of physical decline, right, the rise of Alzheimer's, the loss of creativity.
So once you're 3/4 of a century old, in his view, you've outlived your usefulness. It's 11 a.m. in the Hotel of Life, and it's time to check out. This from the man who shaped America's healthcare policy. In his defense, his brother Rahm is the mayor of Chicago, so they probably don't know anyone who's ever made it to the age of 75 without being taken out by a stray bullet. So I'll give him a pass on that. But for those of us who live outside the city limits, many of us plan on living long, healthy lives, where we can spend our golden years traveling the world, eating dinner at 5, and hearkening back to the good old days when Clay Aiken was still legally a man. And you know who agrees with me? Liberal Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, that's who. The octogenarian just recently told Elle magazine that she has no plans to retire anytime soon. Rumor has it she's waiting for Chelsea Clinton's unborn baby to be elected president so they can choose her replacement. If Ezekiel Emanuel wants to roll a 7 at the age of 75, that's fine. But I, for one, am holding on to the drapes. Here to kick this around is the After Hours panel. She's the host of the Tammy Bruce radio show, who you can get online at tammybruce.com, Tammy Bruce. He's a very fair-minded civil rights defense attorney who you can get online at clearthecourt.com, Mr. Leo Terrell. And he's the PJTV contributor.
He's aged so much.
Not named Zeke.
He's aged.
Whose political satire books are available at Amazon.com, Mr. Scott Ott. Scott, we'll start with you on this one. I guess if you follow what Zeke Emanuel said, once you blow out those birthday candles at the age of 75, it's time to go 6 feet under.
Well, you know, I am really troubled by this in the sense that I believe that we have now allowed Ezekiel Emanuel to establish an arena in which we're about to play. We're going to discuss the pros and cons of whether 75 is old enough, and this is exactly what the left does all the time. They essentially establish a game, and then the right says, oh, well, we got to go play that game. We got to argue about what's the appropriate age for somebody to die or whether who should decide and stuff like that. It's like, it's none of your business how long my life goes on. When I first heard this quote, my first thought was the car trip I took with my grandfather from Pennsylvania to North Carolina. I drove most of the way because, frankly, he was one scary driver. But anyway, we drove down there together, and he shared the riches of his life and experience and history with me. I never would have been able to gain that if it weren't for the fact that he lived way past when he's supposed to.
You know, Leo, 75 is such an arbitrary number because two things really determine how your life is when you get in your 70s and your 80s. Number one is how well you take care of yourself. Do you smoke? Do you drink excessively? Do you take drugs? How do you eat? Do you get plenty of exercise? And the other thing you don't have much control over, but it's important, and those are your genes. If you have family members that live long lives, then odds are you'll probably live one too if you take care of yourself. But why come up with an arbitrary number, even for yourself, if you're talking about when it's time for you to expire?
First of all, I agree with everything that Scott just said. This is cocktail liberal nonsense. My mother just celebrated 2 weeks ago her 84th birthday. Her 84th birthday. She's in excellent health. That gives me the idea that I'm going to live well past 75. Now, this clown who, and I apologize for using the term clown, who made this reference to 75, I want to know how old he is and if he's going to stick to this so-called 75-year date. But you look at people who are on the Supreme Court, you look at people who, a baseball guru like Tommy Lasorda, these people still have a lot to give, and yet to make this arbitrary number makes so many assumptions that it's just totally ridiculous, and yet we're giving this 15 minutes of fame to talk about this ridiculous arbitrary number.
You know, President Reagan was older than the age of 75 when he was president. We've had many Supreme Court justices who have served past the age of 75, including their beloved Ruth Bader Ginsburg. People are living longer. People are taking better care of themselves. People are working. My dad's 74 years old. He works 6 days a week. There are a lot of people out there that do this. Why is it that he took this opportunity to dump on those people?
Well, already in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, they have the same theory, and you get a cyanide pill when you hit a certain age. And there's an understanding that your dying is better for the collective. And you're encouraged to kill yourself effectively, and this is funded by the government. So this is a left-wing idea that through nations that have nationalized health care. The moment that the nation is paying for your health care, and as you get older, it becomes like not a good deal for the country as it thinks about single payer. And this is also one thing that we talked about, death panels. This is another indication of a federal government that has an interest in you getting out of the way because it'll be less expensive to have you out of the way. This also saves Social Security. That this is one of the dynamics, that if you can eliminate the people who are moving into the bankrupt, empty Social Security dynamic, the better off the federal government will be because their stealing of that money will not become as apparent. I think that this was a part of Obamacare. This guy, of course, is not just any guy. We all can have our opinion about when we want to die, but this guy's an architect of Obamacare. He's on the National Institutes of Health when it comes to bioethics. This is a man who clearly at least contributes to the direction of healthcare in this country. So this needs to be seen as a policy direction for the American people to have older people in particular begin to think, maybe he's right. This is why you're not going to get the pacemaker. You're going to go to the hospice. This has been the argument from Obamacare from the beginning.
Let me just quickly respond to this. This country treasures senior citizens. That's why we have Social Security. That's why we have prescription drugs. That's why we have expanded Medicare. And that's why the seniors are the most influential voting bloc. This will never
That's going to
materialize.
change with this.
I don't think,
That's
I don't
going to
think
change.
so.
Let's piggyback on that for a second, Scott, because under normal circumstances, you get a magazine article with a provocative headline like this. You read it, you say that's kooky, you ignore it, you move on. But this story stood out to me principally because this guy was one of the architects of Obamacare. And I couldn't help but to think, Scott, that as he was writing this legislation, as they were talking about it with other advisors, with people in the White House, with people in Congress, this was in the back of their head the whole time. Am I conspiratorial in thinking that?
Well, I wish you were. I really wish you were some sort of a kook. I mean, you're a kook in a lot of ways, but not in this way.
Right, but for different reasons, Scott.
You know, what this reminds me of is FDR's brain trust. It's these people that he sort of relied upon, the cutting-edge philosophers, the cutting-edge economists, and all that kind of stuff, who were socialists to a man. And I think this president is heavily influenced by the so-called great thinkers of thinkology who come up with ideas like this. And I don't doubt for a minute that there is maybe not an organized effort to do this, but this guy knows, Ezekiel Emanuel knows, he's floating a trial balloon. He's kicking off a conversation. He wants the media to begin chattering about this. It's provocative, and they have moved what, Glenn Beck used to refer to as the Overton window. They've moved the framing of the whole discussion of health and life and gerontology and all of that kind of stuff to a new place and now, once again, they've established the ground rules, and we're going to talk about it.
One of the things that the left did with vegetarianism and veganism is they made the transition from it's about your health to it's about animal rights to it's about saving the environment. Meat kills the environment if you look at their current literature. Could you see this argument for kicking the bucket at 75 moving to an environmentalist argument? Save the planet. You've lived too long. You are a burden on society. It's time for you to go to save the planet.
Well, he makes that argument a little bit in The Atlantic in that this is about being less of a burden on the family. And we know that as we age, we begin to wonder a lot. Look at the economy. And you've got maybe your kids are living in the basement and you're 80. Maybe it's time to have them move upstairs. Is your living taking away something from your children? You're going to see the left make those arguments, and I would be less concerned if I didn't see this being applied already in Europe. But this, again, is something that we've seen happen. This is something that whenever the government is in charge of your life, people become the budget. And when people become the budget, people are the ones who get cut.
This guy, again, I think we have given this guy his 15 minutes of attention. He's not near 75 at this point. And he says in his article, I might change my mind. I may push this back to 80 or 85.
Right.
And so, he has zero credibility. And you know.
But he's with, what do you think? He's with the NIH. He's a bioethicist head at the NIH. Don't you think that should matter?
No, because he's one of these cocktail liberals at these parties.
No, he's not.
Well,
he's an influential man who helped design Obamacare and has the president's ear. He's on MSNBC and in the Atlantic for a reason.
I got news for you. You don't tamper with senior citizens, with the electorate in this country. They are the biggest voting bloc in this country, period.
Scott, what are senior citizens who are 75, 80, 85 thinking when they're watching Morning Joe? It's an older audience that watches cable news. When they're sitting there eating their Cheerios, watching this guy say that they're well past their expiration date, what are they thinking?
Well, first of all, I've actually spoken with both of those senior citizens who are watching Morning Joe, they said, first of all, that they weren't really paying attention that much. But secondly, this may make some sense in electoral terms because the Republican voter base skews older. The Democratic voter base, or at least the Democratic enthusiast base, I shouldn't call them voters because they don't show up often enough, but the Democratic enthusiast base skews younger. And so it may make some sense to Democrats to say, hey, let's start talking about the burden on the family. Let's start talking about the burden on the environment. Do you know how much hydrocarbons stuff is generated by a 85-year-old person who's hooked up to all kinds of electronics just to keep them going? I think we need to take this seriously, but I don't think we need to cede the territory to them and say, yes, it is appropriate for there to be a government discussion on this. Now, when it comes to my family, when it comes to my life, I think there's certainly a place for me saying to my loved ones, I don't want extraordinary measures taken. If I drop from a heart attack, let it go.
But that could just as easily happen at the age of 55. Or that could happen at 95. Sure. You never know when that's going to happen.
Well, in this conversation, what it matters is when you've got your 78-year-old grandpa in the hospital, and this is an argument also aimed at those children. When the doctor says, well, we could put in a pacemaker, but it costs so much, and he really would only have a couple years anyway, let's just move him to the hospice. And you've heard the argument that, well, maybe it's better, he's past 75, let's do it. But Leo's right. The people that are going to save us from this are the senior citizens, are the leaders of the family, and their influence on their children, making sure that it remains so it would seem like a family decision. They need to eliminate that argument so that they realize that they're being influenced in a negative way.
All right, Tammy Bruce, you get the last word. Get her online at TammyBruce.com. Leo Terrell, the very fair-minded civil rights defense attorney.
Leo was right. That's not fair.
With great genes. How old's your mother again, Leo?
84.
84?
And I'm 74. I got one more year left.
Carries it well.
And Scott Ott, whose political satire books are available at Amazon.com. If you'd like to comment on today's show, you can do so in the comment section below. And if you're over the age of 75, go ahead and tell Zeke what you think.
We love you.
For After Hours, I'm John Phillips. Thanks for watching.